Hey, Sens fans, welcome to Season 3, Episode 20 of the Senstennial Podcast. On this week's episode, we're excited to be joined by Graeme Nichols. Thanks, Graeme, for joining us yet again. We really appreciate having you on.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for the invite. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, no problem. I'm sure a lot of people in the Sens community know Graeme or follow him on Twitter. So he previously wrote for The Athletic, the Ottawa Citizen, the Six Sens blog, and now he writes about Sens on his Substack, Rome in a Day. And check it out because they send the articles right to your email and you can just open them, read them. It's nice and easy. And I love that. So we're happy to have you back. And let's just jump right into the 2022 trade deadline. So the first trade of the day, the Ottawa Senators go out and they acquired Travis Hamonic from the Vancouver Canucks for Vancouver's 2022 third round pick. So your thoughts on the Sens going out and bringing in a right-handed defenseman?
Well, I think everybody recognizes that Ottawa probably needed a right-handed defenseman at some point, right? Like you're rolling into next season with Nikita Zaitsev and Artem Zub under contract. Those were the only guys under team control. Josh Brown at the time was here, but he was subsequently dealt out. So they had to go out and do something. That was the guy that they targeted for whatever reason. He's got 1 year left. He's making $3 million. The underlying numbers haven't been too favorable when you're analyzing Hamonic's performance in the past, but he's someone that they obviously targeted and felt he could be a positive influence here on this team. And again, this is kind of like the pattern when it comes to Ottawa and player personnel decisions. There's familiarity, whether it's DJ Smith or one of the other coaches or what have you. Someone has a connection to one of these players, and that's kind of what it goes back to. And it hasn't really worked in the past. So, I mean, like they targeted this player for a reason. Maybe he'll be good, maybe he won't. But, this has been kind of the pattern. And a lot of these moves have blown up in the organization's face in the past. And it even precedes DJ Smith's time here, right? You can go back as far as Guy Boucher, and like a number of these moves were brought in. And I don't know if it's Pierre Dorion and not having confidence in his pro scouts or just leaning too heavily on his coaching staff. But I know when Guy Boucher was fired, he said this was going to be one of the things that he wasn't going to do. He wasn't going to lean too heavily on his coaches to influence his player acquisitions. And that hasn't been the case to this point, and it hasn't worked out. But that's not to say that this won't work out or it can't work out. It's just, it's one of the unfortunate things that they're going to have to deal with. And I think, time will prove whether it's a good deal or not. But one of the concerns that I had is you went out and you moved a draft pick again for, you're having a losing season. You're in, you're the fourth worst team in the league right now, statistically. And you're moving a draft pick for a guy who, conceivably Vancouver is trying, or was at the time, was trying to vie for a playoff seed. Why is Vancouver trying to dump this guy for a third round pick when they're trying to vie for a postseason spot? And this is a guy who's been playing like over 18 minutes a game for them. So, obviously they flipped that pick and subsequently got Travis Dermott. But there's a reason why a team like Vancouver is moving this guy out of town. And you can have suspicions about that. Maybe it's ineffective play. Maybe it's just not a good fit in the dressing room or what have you. But Vancouver's moving this guy for a reason. And I think that you can get your suspicions and red flags can be waved a little bit there. But Ottawa targeted this guy, and heading into the offseason, this is my biggest problem with the deal is, you don't know what the market's going to be. And they targeted this guy, and, it's that whole like bird in the hand versus two in the bush, right? You don't know what's going to be available this summer. But at the same time, if good right-handed or right shot defensemen are available this summer, and you've already made your bed with Zub, Zaitsev, and now Hamonic, what do you do?
Okay, wait, here's a conspiracy theory, though. Not conspiracy theory, a bold prediction. Okay. So I was on Cap Friendly today, and I know some people were like, oh, this offseason, the Sens should trade for Mackenzie Weegar. Nice Ottawa native, released that Twitter videos when he was in town saying how much he was happy to be back in town. His contract expires at the end of next season when Travis Hamonic's contract expires. So maybe
he's in free agency. Hamonic's a bridge.
Yeah.
Can't imagine Mackenzie Weegar is going to leave for
his contract also ends next year is Artem Zub.
Don't remind me about that.
I'm just
saying. That's very true. Hopefully I think the right-handed defenseman is extended after next season.
I think one of the things that you just brought up is really interesting, that Pierre Dorion has like historically said, I won't rely so much on coaches for external acquisitions. And At what point does this guy ever learn anything from what he says? Ever? Like, that happens, the last year he goes out, gets Braden Coburn, he gets Eric Goodbranson. They don't work out. He then says, I think we're going to steer clear of moves like this. And that this is exactly what that Hamonic deal feels like. And then to make it even worse is you put it into print that you could have had him for a fourth, but you didn't have one, and they wouldn't take a fifth, so you give them a third.
See, I don't understand that too, because they did have a fourth. It just didn't have to be this year. Like, could have traded next year's fourth.
Yeah.
Like, that's where I kind of got lost there too, right?
Or you just patiently wait that, Logan Browns comes over, but you also get a fourth the next day. And that, my point last week was that, well, they could have had him on waivers, and, allegedly there was a bit of a handshake deal across the league that nobody was going to take him. Totally fair play. But then you put out into the ether that you could have had him for a fourth, but you had to settle for a third, which I believe there is, there was a, statistics done that 57% of third round picks end up playing in the NHL, whereas fourth round picks, it's 36% or something to that effect. That's a pretty drastic jump. And I just, every time you put your foot in your mouth.
And I think it even extends beyond that too, right? Because Dorian also had that quote in his availability where it's like, well, we have tons of picks, so we're not concerned about losing them. And it's like, well, you're a small market team that's, operates on a limited budget. So the one currency that you have are your draft picks. Like, if you don't have a lot of money, your resources are limited. I think, it doesn't take a genius to look at the scouting staff and the size of the front office and say, you know what, you guys are pretty limited. You need as many lottery picks as you can, or lottery balls as you can to roll the dice on a lot of prospects. And that's to come out with a statement like that. It's just it's just ignorant. And I think this fan base is smart enough to kind of see through that. And it's I think just people who've been through the last few years under him have been so confused by the mixed messages and just the word of mouth. And it's just, I think it's just emblematic of just how poor of a communicator he's been, like how poor of a communicator the owner's been. And it's just like, they've really, really, really struggled to get their message out, and not only get it out, but do it in a positive way to placate this fan base. Because as you can see, you can get on board with a rebuild really easily, but when you start miscommunicating and not articulating the message that you want, it can go sideways on you. And I think what you're seeing is a lot of anger and resentment towards some of the things the management has done simply because they cannot communicate a message properly.
Right. And we'll move on to the next trade, because it was another trade where I think some fans were just really upset that Ottawa had failed to retain a player that had developed and really become an effective bottom six player in Ottawa's system. But Nick Paul can't come to terms on a deal with Ottawa and gets traded for Matthew Joseph and a fourth round pick, I believe, in 2024. So another trade where Ottawa basically trades one of their pending UFAs and brings in a guy who they have some team control over because he's a restricted free agent.
I guess Nick Paul can't do it all, right? He can't sign a contract. Yeah, you know what? It's a little bit bittersweet, right? Because here's a guy who was waived a few times. You can disagree with what was done in the past and whether or not he should have had an extended opportunity, or Guy Boucher that just wasn't there. The coaching staff obviously just didn't like him, but he persevered. He got through it, and he turned himself into a useful player for this organization, right? And to see a guy kind of go through those trials and tribulations here, it's a little bit bittersweet to see him go, but at the same time, he's going to a team that obviously values him. He's going to a very smart team in the Tampa Bay Lightning that obviously looked at him and saw something that's more valuable to them this season for a postseason run than what Matthew Joseph brought. And that's nothing against Matthew Joseph. I think it's just the circumstances of where they are and the kind of player that they see in Nick Paul. They see a big guy who can play, who can throw the body around. He does a little bit of everything. That's kind of the moniker for him. And it kind of sucks. It kind of sucks just to lose a guy who was so well liked, good community guy. I believe his fiance was working for Chio. You had a chance to hold on to him, but at the same time, I understand from Ottawa's situation, you don't want you don't want to spend a lot of your limited resources retaining a bottom six guy. Like, it doesn't make sense to extend a guy for 4 years. So I totally see it from Ottawa's point of view. I think what I just kind of struggle to understand is, like, Matthew Joseph is probably at his best as another depth forward. And, like, you've got a lot of depth pieces in the pipeline, and there's nothing wrong with Matthew Joseph as a player. And I think, he offers a lot of things that Nick Paul brings, even though their skill sets are different. I think he brings a lot of things to the table that, just from an overall perspective, like, he can do a lot of things that Nick Paul did. He can kill penalties at an elite level. He can play a depth role. He's a speed guy. He's a burner. He's kind of like an Alex Formanton without maybe as much offensive upside. In saying that, I just don't know if getting another depth player is the right move. Maybe getting a higher pick that they could have parlayed into a bigger package to bring a better quality player in might have been the better play. But I mean, it's easy to say that and sit here today, but it's another thing to actually do it and bring a trade to fruition like that. Like, maybe Nick Paul could have been moved for a second round pick that you could parlay down the road for a better asset. But was that deal ever on the table? Like, I don't know what kind of draft picks were being offered for Nick Paul. So it's easy to say that. So
I know Dorian had said that there were other kinds of deals on the table for Nick Paul, and he did say draft picks or draft picks and prospects as the two other options. I mean, what I do kind of like about this trade, though, is here's a guy, and I know he didn't play in every match for the Lightning in their playoff run last year, but he's got that playoff experience. He's younger than Nick Paul, put up as many points as Nick Paul in the same frame of time. He's got more speed than Nick Paul. Nick Paul was never a strong skater. He has good defensive analytics, which is great to see. And seeing him play the last few games, he's looked really good. And that's exciting. And I hope they can sign him to a nice cheap deal for, 2 or 3 years and have that guy. But I do also agree with you that, you're trading a depth player, getting a depth player in, and what the Sens really need is some top end talent. And that only comes through the draft or, free agency, which we know that notoriously they don't really go big fish hunting in free agency, or through like a blockbuster trade, which Ottawa tends to shy away from unless, they really think they're going all in, like we saw with the Duchesne trade. So
it's interesting too, right? Because like Pierre LeBrun came out after that trade was made, and he said, well, in talking to Julien Brisebois, Tampa Bay's general manager, like Matthew Joseph was a possible, like he was kind of going down the Anthony Duclair road where, this is a team with limited financial money at the other end of the spectrum, right? Like they were pressing up against the cap ceiling. So they looked at Joseph as a guy who they wouldn't necessarily qualify in arbitration because they were afraid of an arbitrator's decision. So he could have been available to Ottawa for nothing this summer potentially, but then again, you have to convince a guy to come here to play. So that's totally different. And
he's best friends with Shabbat.
No, exactly.
How many best friends do we have? Like, do we have a number on that? I think we're at 3 or 4 now. So
it's a market of fish. You got to take advantage of it, man. You got to keep guys in Ottawa, apparently. So that's the best way to do it. The guys want to stay, work for Brady, and just keep the train rolling.
Yeah,
love that.
We'll lump the next couple of trades in together. I'm going to ignore the McNiven trade because I think that was just to have some assurance in net. But we can talk about Josh Brown being shipped out. I think a lot of Sens fans are happy with that. Zack Stanford as well. Stanford goes for Winnipeg's 2022 fifth. Josh Brown goes with an Ottawa conditional 7th for Zach Senyshyn, who's from Ottawa, and Boston's 2022 fifth. So just those two trades mopped together at the end there.
Just picks, right? It's just adding some picks to the coffers, and that's all you can really expect when you're offering like just depth players on a really bad team. Like Josh Brown took a lot of abuse from the fans. He's just one of those big physical guys that DJ Smith just loves, and it just never really seemed to work out for him here. And no fault of his own or anything like that. It just didn't work out. And Zack Stanford, same thing, right? Like big winger who had some offensive upside. Like there was, I don't know for you guys, but like watching him play, there's a couple games where you watch him, he's stick handling, he's playing with the puck at tight spaces, like coming off the sidewall and stuff. You're like, holy shit, like where did this come from? And then you don't see it for like 3 weeks again. And
that's literally what we have said.
Yeah.
Like almost word for word.
Like he can play in tight spaces with the puck, and his shot was decent, and you can see glimpses of it. And then you can see why scouts would be kind of like tantalized. Like maybe there's a year where this guy could break out and score like 15 to 20 goals for your club. But it just never materialized consistency. And it's not like he didn't have opportunities to play up and down the lineup, right? With all the injuries that the teams had, like there were opportunities there and he just never really seemed to take advantage of them. And, I've heard some people refer to his work ethic and his desire to be here, but I don't know the guy personally. And I don't think many people outside the locker room do. So it seems unfair to say stuff like that, but it's kind of just a function of his season. It's just inconsistent. And that's kind of been the MO for his career, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I think Ottawa probably would have been the best place to gauge that value, whether he has that upside or not, because he did have the opportunity to do that. He was never going to get that opportunity in St. Louis. And, once he gets here, he gets, the ability to play with, a top line winger and a center, and just couldn't figure it out other than the hat trick game. But
Logan Brown's 5 goals. He's 5 games away from returning that 4th round pick. So it's not like, it's not the be all end all. So
if the Sens can get a 4th and 5th technically in return for Stanford, that would be great.
I think it's most likely a 5th for Logan Brown, but
well, he passed through waivers, so we'll just
that's fair. That's fair.
But anyway, there are a couple of guys.
Pivoting away from the trade deadline talk here, Graeme. The Sens had a number of big question marks heading into this season about the forward group and their respective ceilings, whether this Sens blue line is viable. Can the team find reliable goaltending, if this coach or GM can help this team take another step? Do you think the Sens fans have received answers to any of these questions, or do you think that we're still left wondering?
I think with the forward core, I think there's enough evidence. You look at what Josh Norris has done this year; like he's trended up. I think Tim Stützle, since pivoting to center, he's trending up in a significant way. Brady Tkachuk is Brady Tkachuk. Drake Batherson's trended up, and he's been fantastic for them when healthy. Unfortunately, his season was derailed a bit there by that unfortunate ankle sprain. But I think if you look at Ottawa's young core, and I'd include Shane Pinto in that, I think you saw enough from Shane Pinto in that snapshot of games that he played early in the season that there's a lot of trust. And Alex Formanton, I didn't even mention him. Like you can put a lot of faith into the group that Ottawa's built, just as a collective. Like maybe they don't have that elite number one guy that a lot of teams seem to have, but they seem to have a collection of very, very good young players who should have that unique opportunity to grow together as a unit. And that will hopefully make them more cohesive, and you get the camaraderie and that sense of purpose as these guys get a little bit older in age together. I think that's probably one of the most exciting elements that this franchise has going for it. And then you look at this year's draft, they have an opportunity to draft in the top 5 or top 10 again. And then you can add like another little young staple to this team, whether it winds up being a defenseman or another forward. They look deep down the middle, and if they can add some more skill to the wing, that'd be fantastic. And, there's the Claude Giroux pipe dream for this offseason. I'm not sure if you guys wanted to talk about that later on, but, that's one of the other things that's out there right now. But as far as the other questions, like you mentioned the blue line and goaltending, I think the question marks are still out. I know Jake Sanderson just signed, which is an exciting building block piece that they're going to add on the back end whenever he gets healthy. But maybe he doesn't play until next season. But he's the guy who's supposed to bolster the blue line. Like if he's not here, they don't have much coming through the pipeline that's safely projectable, unfortunately. Especially with upside. Like, it looks like you have a bunch of guys that could play NHL games. It's just a question of how good are these guys going to be when they're at the peak of their career? Like how good are guys like Lassie Thompson and Jacob Bernard-Dock are going to be? We don't know. They're not safely projectable. But yeah, Jake Sanderson's exciting, and they need him to pan. Because without him, it's just Thomas Chabot, and then you have one more year of Artem Zub guaranteed, and after that, it's just a bunch of more veteran question marks. Like Nikita Zaitsev, I think, has absolutely struggled through this season. I haven't thought his first couple seasons here have been particularly good to begin with, but this season he took another step back, and it's been a disappointing year for him. And we'll see what Travis Hamonic can offer. And on the left side, like I know everybody likes Eric Brandstrom because he's the shiny prospect that we got back in the Mark Stone trade, but I haven't seen as much growth from him as others. And I just don't know. I don't know if Ottawa is going to be the best place for him because you have Sanderson and Chabot playing ahead of him. The power play minutes are going to be probably small moving forward, unless he's on the second unit with Sanderson or something. But as an undersized guy who's not especially fleet of foot, like he moves the puck well, but you got to bring more to the table. And for me, the numbers haven't been as good as they could be for a guy who's supposed to have that puck moving ability and is supposed to have that hockey sense and everything else. It's just it just hasn't been there enough for me. And we've seen it under DJ Smith. He hasn't really responded too favorably to the player over the past year and a half, although he seems to be warming up a little bit down the stretch here. But I feel like he's a candidate for a trade, even though the trade value might not be there. Maybe he's a piece that they package in a deal to bring in, I don't know, maybe another underachieving prospect down the road, or a guy who just hasn't panned out for another organization.
Yeah, and then trade a project for a project.
Exactly. Goaltending, Anton Forsberg's been fantastic, but I mean, we're talking about like a month and a half sample, right? Like it's a small sample size of games. Ottawa's been bitten before on these kind of contracts. Not that, not the guys like Andrew Hammond, Anders Nilsson, God, who am I missing? Mike Condon. Not that those guys have anything to do with Anton Forsberg's play right now, but I mean, it's one of those back of your mind kind of things where, you've ridden the hot hand before and you've been burned. So Matt Murray is Matt Murray, and that hasn't changed. And I don't know what they're going to do. I have no idea how the organization is going to handle this deal moving forward, whether he's a candidate for a buyout this summer or not. Because you don't know what you're getting. And I think because of Matt Murray's play, you almost had to sign Anton Forsberg, because you can't go into next season with Philip Gustafsson as your number two. And, he's another goaltender who hasn't played a lot this year. And it's kind of just no fault of his own. It's just he's essentially just a victim of circumstances, really, because they've gone with the two veteran guys. When Matt Murray gets hurt, Gustafsson comes up, plays a game or two, and then Murray comes back and he's kind of lost in the shuffle. He's been up and down between Belleville and Ottawa all season. He hasn't played consistently and he hasn't played well. So he's a guy in a one-way contract next year. So I don't even know what's going to happen with him. And then Mads Sogard's up. So they're going to give him a little showcase here and see what he has to offer. And I don't know. I have absolutely no idea how their goaltending situation is going to pan out this summer. It can go in so many different directions. And I think it's all dependent on how they view Matt Murray and what they do with that contract.
Yeah, that's going
to be absolutely key. Absolutely key. Because I agree. I think we had to sign Forsberg based on, like Murray has shown that he can't provide us stability, and that he can provide us occasional solid play, but not stability. And, Forsberg has been the only guy this season who's shown he can do that. And and one final point here as well is, with another trade deadline in the bag, one of these final questions was, can this coach and can this GM put together, like a winning roster? I think that question remains outstanding as well, because, or perhaps it's answered, but in the negative. I don't necessarily want to put it on DJ Smith, but maybe on Dorian. I think a lot of Sens fans feel they have their question about whether he can build a winning team, and the answer is maybe no.
It's tough, right? Because you look at, we talked about Brandstrom kind of like bouncing around the lineup and not really getting the confidence of the coaching staff until late. And you could even say the same with like Tim Stützle. They kind of just, even though he's thriving at center, like that opportunity may not have existed had everyone played, if everybody was healthy, if Colin White was healthy, if Shane Pinto was healthy. This is a situation where he might not have got those reps, and then we'd be having questions about what's Tim Stützle's future with the Ottawa Senators. Is he a good goal-scoring winger? Can he play a solid two-way game at the wing? And now we're not even having to worry about those conversations, because you're penciling him in down the middle, and you think Ottawa's position of strength is center down the middle, and it's reassuring. It feels good, but it's almost like, even though it was bad luck for the players to get hurt at the time that they did, it gave an opportunity for a guy to thrive, and that may be the best thing for his development long-term. So positive came out of a negative. But you're right. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you bring up a really good point there, because it just seems as though they were so against the idea of moving Stützle to center. And, they lucked into the fact that he actually plays center quite well, good defensively, moves the puck well. And it just seems like one of those moves for Dorian. He just happens to luck into it and it works out. And now center is the position of strength, whereas it didn't look so. So I think it's interesting that you bring that up, because it's literally just another one of those type scenarios for him.
I'm not convinced of anything when it comes to Pierre Dorion. I think it's really easy to tear down a roster and accumulate picks, and you can argue that some of those moves didn't work out at all, or they didn't extract as much value as they can. I think I think a lot of people have given him kind of like a blank slate and are willing to accept a lot of like mediocrity because it's a rebuild and because of who his boss is. And, you look at some of the draft pick currency that he's moved out, even though it's a rebuild, whether it's Matt Murray, Derek Stepan, a number of other players where they've moved picks out for sub replacement level value. And that, it's not like he's made these trades and you're like, oh, this was a great trade. And then 6 months later, you're like, oh, what a terrible trade that was. It's like, there was a lot of red flags at the time. There's a lot of risks that you could point out. There's a lot of things that you could point out in terms of saying, well, we're a small market organization. Why are we doing this? Especially during a rebuild? Like, why are we expediting, or why are we getting these veterans who aren't really particularly strong? The numbers already showcase that and forecast that and foreshadow probably poor play moving forward. Like, why are we targeting these players? And it is alarming. And I've beaten the drum about analytics and everything else. And I think Ottawa is one of the few organizations left in the NHL that doesn't have like full-time staffers doing this. They outsource to like third-party companies to get their information and data. And it's almost like they're not. It's the modern game, right? And if you fall so far behind the 8 ball, it's hard to catch up. And by the time you catch up, you're still going to be like 3 or 4 years behind what everybody else is doing. So it's frustrating. But I mean, in saying that, I think, this organization can win. It can win under this owner. They've done it before. It's just they have to clean up their act.
Yeah, I absolutely couldn't agree more on that one. I think with the internal cap and all that sort of stuff, it's just going to be a continuous question mark. And, Pierre Dorion's moves are going to be ups and downs, more downs than ups, in my opinion. But I think that's a good segue to the next question, in that what moves do you think Dorion needs to make in the offseason to inspire confidence in the management going forward?
I think they need a top 4 defenseman. I think they need 1 or 2 top 6 forwards. And this is all really easy to say. It's going to be harder to do, right? Ottawa is either going to have to overpay with money, or they're going to have to pay in future assets. And I think if you look at Ottawa's farm system, and I think we've talked about this on your podcast before, you have Jake Sanderson, you have Ridley Grigg. And after those two, I don't think you have many safely projectable guys. You got guys who are probably going to play in the league at some point, like Igor Sokolov. A lot of people love him. Angus Crookshank's another one that a lot of people like.
Roby Urbanti. Can't forget that Finn.
You're a big Urbanti fan.
I like him.
He's a lot of guys like that in the system, right? Like guys who are probably going to play games. It's just a matter of how good are these guys going to be at the NHL level? And I don't know if there's a safe answer to that, whether you can pencil these guys in automatically in the top 6 or top 9 even. So if you get into one of those situations where they start moving all out of like prospect currency and draft picks, you're in a situation where you could kind of leave yourself a little bit shorthanded down the road. And maybe, if you make missteps like Ottawa's made in the past, then, you're not bankrupting the system, but you're kind of putting yourself behind the 8 ball way more than you should. So.
Yeah. And I'm kind of wondering what they do in terms of like Kevin Fiala. I know his name is mentioned quite a bit. Michael Russo, who writes, I believe, for The Athletic for the Minnesota Wild, he's been a pretty reliable source in that market. And he said that Ottawa really wants Fiala badly. So that's something to keep our eyes out for. I know we kind of touched on it earlier with Claude Giroux, but I thought it was more recent that it came out that he was actually looking for a cup. So I think if he doesn't win a cup this offseason, my personal opinion is he's going to go to a team that'll contend next year. But I think if he does win a cup this season, then that might influence him to go to Ottawa because he's won his cup. Now he can return to the town he grew up in and play there. So I think it kind of hinges on that. But I think this is the offseason.
You can't win a cup before 40 in Ottawa? Come on, man.
Graham, I'm not Not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying I don't think Ottawa's quite there yet, but he definitely would move the needle, right? And I think, and I know a lot of people want to try Formanton in the top 6 going into next season. I don't see him as being the guy on the left side. He has trouble finishing. And when Stützle was drafted, he was drafted as a dynamic, great playmaker, very good passing vision. He has a hell of a shot, don't get me wrong, but he plays more as a playmaker style guy. He likes to pass the puck first. And I think you need someone who can finish on his wing. And if you had a guy who, was like Josh Norris playing on Stützle's wing, I think then you would see that Stützle would have a lot more points this season. But I think the fact of the matter is he's playing with guys like Nick Paul, Alex Formanton. Connor Brown is obviously he's having his best offensive season in his career, but he's still not a guy I would describe as a goal scorer. I know last season he had 20, but hasn't shown that same finishing ability this year. So I think really he needs a guy who can put the puck in the back of the net. And I think you need a player like Claude Giroux or like Kevin Fiala or anyone, right? Go out and sign Philip Forsberg, just somebody who can actually score. And I think that would really help too.
I think everybody would agree with the fact that if Connor Brown and Formanton are slotting in on the third line, then Ottawa's doing pretty well, just as a forward group, right? But I think one of the things, even if Ottawa doesn't necessarily upgrade their forward group significantly, I think one of the things that you can do to positively impact the production and play of your forwards is improve that blue line. I think that's been like the weakness for this organization, essentially since they've gone on that cup run back in 2007. Like it's just been an inconsistent group and it's been a revolving door of defensemen. They've tried everything to bolster it and nothing's really worked and nothing's been sustained. Like, you've had some good defensemen come in and out of the lineup here over the past, 15 years, but hasn't been stability, and hopefully Jake Sanderson is that guy to move it forward, because if he can't do it and if he needs some help, like they're going to have to go out and get someone else. And that's not to begrudge the guys who are already here, but I think, if Hammond can play in the bottom pairing and you can find another guy to play the right side, and then you can slide Zub up to play with Chabot, I think you're talking about a decent unit now. And then, the better the team plays in front of the goaltenders, the less pressure you have to put on Matt Murray and Anton Forsberg to replicate what's been happening over the past 20 games or so. So I think blue line's the biggest thing that they have to address. And if they can get a top forward or top 6 forward or 2, then perfect. But it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what they do with their money. And there's a lot of guys who are needing new contracts, right? Zub's going to be unrestricted next season, so they can negotiate with him in the offseason. You got Alex Formanton, who is an RFA. That's going to be an interesting contract. Josh Norris is going to be an interesting contract. All of a sudden, a lot of these young guys are going to be requiring new deals, and you got to pay them. And, you got to pay them fairly, and that's going to be eating up a good chunk of the cap and what's available to supplement the rest of the roster and improve the depth around them. So it's going to be fascinating to see what they do. And I don't know, maybe it's overstepping, or maybe it's just kind of overemphasizing how big of a summer this is for Pierre Dorion, but it might be his last in Ottawa if he can't improve the state of the roster around them and do it in an effective way. Like, it's going to be an interesting time. But maybe, I don't know, maybe if he views it as his last offseason, maybe he just goes like all Alex Anthopoulos on it and just trades everything and then tries to build a good roster around the guys. So it's going to be interesting to see. It should be a lot of fun. Lots of stuff to talk about for sure.
For sure. So Graeme, we'll move on to the next one here. So the Sens again are headed for a very basement-esque finish right now. Like you mentioned earlier, they're in the 4th last position. What are your thoughts on the Sens just heading for another lottery pick?
It's going to be hard to avoid, right? Like Sanderson's, it depends, I guess, on what his timeline is, whether he's going to get in the games or not. But you're already missing Tom Chabot on the left side. And there's just, as good as Michael Del Zotto has been over the last couple games, the back end's just so weak right now in terms of ability and talent and depth that it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard for them to get in games. And, adding Drake Batherson is great because what they've lacked over the past few weeks is a lot of finishing ability. And, it's essentially been the Josh Norris one-timer show for the past month and a half. And, and just to add some more offensive depth is huge. And, if Anton Forsberg can keep them in games and then give those guys an opportunity to steal one or two, then that may happen. But I think they're going to be hard pressed for wins. They're going into Nashville tomorrow night. And then I think they got Nashville again coming back home. They got Montreal and I think a couple games against Detroit. So a couple weaker opponents. They have some opportunities to pick up a couple points, but I'm not anticipating them escaping the basement with like a late season run or anything. I just think the roster composition is it's not deep enough. It's not talented enough to really carry them forward. And it's all predicated on Forsberg continuing a strong play. So I just don't envision them going on a run to move them too far out of the lottery.
Are you looking forward to another top end pick though? Like, I know it's hard because you want to see the team get wins and make progress, but at the same time, it's kind of hard to ignore that the top 7 players and maybe top 10 players in this draft are pretty quality guys.
Oh, for sure. And, you see the body language on the bench. Like, I think it was the Arizona game, right? Where like Brady Tkachuk had his head down on the bench for like 35, 40 seconds or whatever it was. And it's just him and Norris, their comments after the game, they're pretty frustrated, and you never want your young core to endure too many losses and to take it on themselves. But I think at the same time, those players kind of have to recognize that it's not them. Like, I know they want the team to be successful, but like the best players this year have always been the young guys, and that's been consistent throughout the course of the year. It's not has nothing to do with them. It's the talent that surrounds them. It's the pressure of the coaching staff and management to put guys in positions to succeed. And they, to that end, I think the organization has failed a little bit, and that's no fault of the players. And, adding a young player, like you guys are a little bit younger than I am now, but like having endured like the early 90s and stuff, like that felt like forever, but you endured it and you got through it because you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I think for a lot of fans now, they kind of see a light at the end of the tunnel a little bit. It's just taken a little bit longer than many of us had hoped or thought, going back, like, this is supposed to be the first year of unparalleled success, and there's still a bottom 5 team in the league, right? So, talent's around the corner. Adding another top 10 picks, not bad. I don't mind losing. I don't mind adding high picks. The more high picks, the better. But at some point, you have to make inroads. You can't just have one of those, perennial Buffalo organizations or Edmonton Oilers situations where you're just constantly losing. The players are getting shuffled in and out, and then you start panic and making bad trades for the sake of trying to shake up the core and stuff. I think, you got to stick with a plan. You can't do anything out of panic or desperation. And you kind of, if you have an opportunity to add great young talent that should be inexpensive for a couple of years, I think you get excited, and hopefully Ottawa gets a really strong candidate. And, you just got to keep adding to the system. I think if you're a small market team and, you can look across other sports like baseball and stuff, like the Tampa Bay Rays have one of the best minor league systems in all of baseball. And they're not afraid to move guys out, even when they're playing well, to accrue and stockpile the young system, because that's their pipeline. That is how they have success. And I think Ottawa hasn't necessarily done that, but I'm hoping they will. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. And you mentioned, hope and light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that, all of us Sens fans are reaching for that right now. And to that point, and this is our final question, so thanks again for coming on today, Graeme. But what has you most excited right now as a Sens fan? What's your personal light at the end of the tunnel?
I just think there's nothing on the roster that is the bright light. I think it's just a collection of stuff. I think Brady Tkachuk signing a contract extension. I mean, we can argue the dollars and cents, whether it was too much or the right amount or whatever. I think his commitment to this organization is huge. I think that's a very strong message to the fans and to everyone, really, just to say, hey, I'm here for the long haul. We're going to do this and do it right. And you hope the other guys follow suit. Like, I'm hoping Josh Norris gets signed to a team-friendly long-term deal. I hope Alex Formanton does the same. And I hope the Senators just continue to add and build around them. And, hopefully guys like Tyler Boucher pan out. And hopefully Jake Sanderson is the stud that everybody is hoping him to be. And he bolsters the blue line. And then it's just a matter of solving the goaltending question.
Yeah. Senators are built on hope. Well, with that, thank you so much, Graeme, for joining us yet again. Time kind of flew by here, but we really appreciate having you on. So it's always great to get your insights into these things.
No, anytime you guys want. That was a lot of fun. Thank you very much. And nice to meet you, Bennett.
Good to meet you as well. Yeah.
How you pronounce your name? Like, I'm not even sure. Is it Benet or is it Bennett?
Oh
you had
man,
it- you had
I
it right the
wish it
first
was
time.
Finet.
Yeah. Graeme, in a quick 45 minutes, you have done better than all the elementary school teachers I ever had. So hats off.
I've had it the worst, man. So like when I was in high school, we had a supply for like homeroom, and he's like reading the list of names, and then he gets down to mine. He's like, "Is there a Graeme Nichols here?"
Oh
I'm like,
no.
So I've had that before too. So don't feel bad.
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough. Before we let you go, did you want to plug anything?
Yeah, you can find my stuff on Twitter at @6Sens. You can also find my work at Roman a Day. The URL for that is just gnichols@substack.com. And thank you guys again for having me on. That was a lot of fun.
Cool. Thanks so much, Graeme. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Go Sens, go.